The next case is In Re Appraisal of Regal Entertainment Group. This is a Delaware Chancery Court case. It's a dissenting shareholder case. I found it to be quite interesting and entertaining case. No pun intended. Certain common shareholders sued for a higher value than offered in the deal price. The Delaware Chancery Court took it upon itself to make the determination of fair value as required by the statute. Note, fair value, not fair market value. In discharging its statutory mandate, the Court of Chancery has discretion to select one of the parties' valuation models as its framework or fashion its own. And that's really important as we get into this case, that it can factor its own model in arriving at a conclusion. That's right in the statute in Delaware. So important to note that. So the court decided to determine the fair value using the deal price minus synergies plus the change in value between the signing and the closing. And now that was important because of COVID-19, that last point. There was a change in value between the signing and the closing, and it was downward because of COVID-19. So that was the impact there. The value determined by the court is, the Chancery Court, is $23.60 versus a deal price of $23. So it's slightly greater than the deal price. So the court considered the deal price process to be viable and reflective of the fair market value. So that's an important point to note too, in all these Chancery Court decisions that deal with fair value and shareholder dissent suits like this, is was there a good process in place, and was it followed, and was it appropriate for the situation? So this was a synergistic transaction, and as such, the court must determine the value as a going concern, and then deduct any value derived from the expectation of the merger. So this is following the model that we all know from Hitchner's book and Pratt's book on levels of value, where synergy is not part of fair market value. Now, the statute in Delaware calls for fair value, but nor is synergy part of fair value. Synergy is generally considered to be part of investment value. And so the court here, and this follows along the lines of a number of these other cases in Delaware Chancery that have come up recently, of taking out this synergistic value when determining what the fair value is, taking it out of the deal price. So Cineworld, who is the buyer in this case, had undertaken a detailed analysis of the synergy value it could derive from the transaction, which it had to do in order to obtain debt financing for the transaction, which is an interesting side point in here. The judge decided to fashion his own model in coming up with the value for purposes of deciding this case. And so he relied on a 2018 Boston Consulting Group study that found that sell-side stockholders of the target company typically capture about 54% of the synergies. The court said that $3.77 needed to be deducted from the deal price as synergy value, that number being 54% of the determined by these studies, or by the study of the particular case of the synergies in the deal. So as I said, there was also an upward adjustment for the effect. I'm sorry, I said COVID and I was wrong on that. It was an upward effect for the 2017 Tax Act that occurred between the signing date and the closing. That was the big drop in the corporate tax, resulting in a value of $23.60. So important to note on this synergies also, and the side note on the case, and it's here in my point. So let's go to the takeaways. So this case is proof once again that shareholders who challenge the adequacy of a deal could end up with a result that is less than the deal price. Had it not been for the increase in the price that the judge used relative to the drop in the tax rates, that would have certainly been the case here, and the dissenting shareholders would have ended up with less than the deal price. So the only thing that saved the shareholders in this case was the 2017 Tax Act. Interestingly, the synergies determined in this case were considered by the sellers to be BS. And they used the full words in the opinion, by the way. And that was a quote right from the testimony of two of the people on the seller's side. So they thought the synergies were way overstated. They were. I went in and looked later to the financial statements for the buyer, Cineworld, to find that they had in fact dropped an awful lot of charge against the goodwill. But I also have taken into account that that's where the COVID-19 came in, was the subsequent write-down had something to do with that. So the closing date is the date that the fair value is measured. The closing date of the transaction, not the date that the deal is announced. And that came into it too. So again, bottom line, if you're suing in a Delaware Chancery Court and you're saying, I didn't get a good enough deal as a dissenting seller, be cautioned, you could end up with less money, not more. Jim, Drew? Drew?
Yeah, your takeaway on that, Jim, is exactly right. And we particularly see that, as you both know, and I'm sure our audience knows, that the Delaware Chancery Court has the most experience in dealing with these issues and probably refines valuation issues and adequate of deal prices more than any set of courts in the country. So regardless of the judicial officer in that court, there are a lot of case authorities out there that show that a challenge ends up, the plaintiff is an unhappy camper when the result comes out. And you pointed out in your takeaways, there were a number of things, just an odd number of events that had to fall the shareholders' way in order for them to get an adequate result. Let's call it an adequate result. Had those oddities not occurred, and there are plenty of authorities from Delaware and other places that in this setting they don't occur, it can be be careful of what you wish for. So you know, the old adage, pigs get fat, hogs get slaughtered, really holds here. You got to be very careful in making these deal price challenges, because not every deal is a bad deal. That's a huge takeaway, and the courts know.
Yeah, I was trying to get to my unmute, and so I apologize. I that kind of got lost in translation when I read this case. You know, on the synergies that were being identified, they did seem to be outrageous, if I recall correctly, in the fact pattern, Jim.
There was like $100 million of there were like $100 million of synergies.
Yeah.
And they initially came up with a number of 84 million. And this just tickles me. This whole accounting, this fair value accounting and purchase price allocation. I mean, this stuff it drives me crazy, because anyway, here's a case where they had to get to 100 million of synergies, so they had to back into it, or they weren't going to get the loans on the deal. And then once you were stuck with that, and you go with a dissenting shareholder, Drew's point's right on target.
Right.
You got a problem.
Yep. Right. Good.
All right.
Good.
All right.